Welcome to Homeschool Nolan, here to help you navigate learning in the digital age. Today I'd like to talk about one of the most important leaders in Chinese history that you probably never heard of, and that is Madame Chiang Kai-Shek, and how she helped create modern China. China's certainly been in the news a lot lately. Many in the West still don't quite understand China. That's because in order to understand China, you must understand its history. And the modern China we know today was largely forged by its leaders from the 20th century, men like Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. But often overlooked is Madame Chiang Kai-Shek and the role she played in helping to create modern China. As a student of Chinese history, I never really thought much of her until I came across this book at the library, The Last Empress, Madame Chiang Kai-Shek and the Birth of Modern China. What struck me was the phrase, modern China. When I think of modern China, I think of the China I see today, with skyscrapers, high-speed trains, and factories producing everything from t-shirts to smartphones, all under the governance of the CCP. I usually don't think of her husband, Generalissimo Chiang Kai-Shek, who was the leader of nationalist China until Mao Zedong and the communists took over in 1949. But upon reading this book, I was fascinated about how a petite 5-foot-tall Chinese woman born in imperial China was able to capture the attention, admiration, and respect of millions in the West, including world leaders and a US president, as she campaigned tirelessly on behalf of China. Even though she and her husband failed in their life mission to unify China, there's no denying the tremendous influence she had in helping China's rise from being a beaten down and dying imperial dynasty into an important major country on the world stage. But first, who was Madame Chiang Kai-Shek? Madame Chiang Kai-Shek was born as Sung Meiling, as the youngest daughter of Charlie Sung, who was one of the richest men in China. She was born around 1897 during the final years of imperial China, where women had no rights. However, her American-educated father was able to send her to the United States during her formative years as a teenager, where she graduated from Wellesley, a private women's college in Massachusetts. By the time she returned to China in 1917, the Qing Emperor had been overthrown, and Imperial China had become the Republic of China, well, at least in name. In reality, China was ruled by competing warlords and revolutionaries. Chief among them was Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who was financed by her father Charlie Sung. Now, Sun Yat-sen was also the husband of Mei Ling's older sister, Sung Chi-ling. Now, serving under Sun Yat-sen was a rising military officer named Chiang Kai-Shek, whom Mei Ling met and then married in 1927, and thereby becoming Madame Chiang Kai-Shek. By then, though, Sun Yat-sen, the revolutionary, had died, and her husband Chiang Kai-Shek had become the leader of the Republic of China and set out to unify China under his nationalist government. But standing in his way was the Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, and thus begun a civil war between his nationalist KMT party and the CCP, and this war spanned over 2 decades. But then, to add to China's misery, Japan invaded China in the 1930s, and Chiang Kai-shek's army was no match for the Japanese army, as it failed to protect the Chinese people from Japanese aggression and atrocities in places like Shanghai and Nanking. And this is where Madame Chiang Kai-Shek came in. Chiang Kai-shek himself spoke no English, but his wife spoke perfectly English. She was also a Christian, charming, and attractive. She was the perfect ambassador and the face of China to the Western world. In 1937, Chiang put his wife in charge of the Chinese Air Force, and she worked with American Air Force officer Claire Chennault to form the legendary Flying Tigers that defended the skies over China and boosted the morale of the Chinese people. But China needed more than just planes and pilots. They also needed money and weapons on the ground. So throughout the war, Madame Chiang Kai-Shek campaigned tirelessly to get the United States and her allies to give more aid to China. She probably reached the peak of her influence in 1943 when she went on a goodwill tour in the United States. She spoke in front of a packed crowd at the Hollywood Bowl in California, attended by major celebrities such as Shirley Temple and Rita Hayworth. But the highlight was when she became the first Chinese national and only the second woman to speak to a joint session of Congress, where she delivered a stirring speech about building a better world and winning the war to help construct a world where everyone could live in harmony and peace. Her speech was a smashing success and resulted in billions of dollars in more aid to China. Congress was so charmed by Madame Chiang that they also, after her speech, ended up repealing the Chinese Exclusion Act, which had barred Chinese immigration into the US for over 60 years. No wonder Life magazine once called her the most powerful woman in the world. But despite her influence, her husband, Generalissimo Chiang Kai-Shek, was never able to bring peace and unify China. His army was continually plagued with corruption, incompetence, and low morale. American military leaders were frustrated that he always seemed more interested in fighting the communists than the Japanese. After Japan was defeated in 1945, Chiang Kai-shek's army continued to struggle to fight against Mao's more disciplined communist army. And despite starting with a nearly 2-to-1 advantage in men and material, Chiang Kai-shek's army finally lost China in 1949 and was forced to retreat to the island of Taiwan. But even in exile, she and her husband never gave up on the idea that they still governed all of China. Madame Chiang was still able to use her influence to convince the United Nations to allow the Republic of China on Taiwan to continue to occupy China's seat at the United Nations. And this charade lasted until 1971. So given all this, why was Madame Chiang Kai-shek important? After all, she and her husband never realized their dream of unifying China. I believe that she is important because she really did change the way the world viewed China and the Chinese people in the 20th century. Remember, when she was born back in the 19th century, China was a humiliated and dying imperial power, abused by both the Japanese and the Western imperialists. Because of Madame Chiang Kai-shek, China began to be viewed as a modern country, a major power, and an important partner in the 20th century. She also blew past stereotypes of Chinese people and Chinese women. It was because of her that the Chinese Exclusion Act was finally repealed in the United States. If you have time, I encourage you to check out video clips of her on YouTube, and you'll see how her charisma and force of personality still really come through in these old black and white clips. Now, she was by no means perfect. Underneath that public persona, she was also known to be power-hungry, arrogant, and out of touch. But that doesn't take away from the fact that her remarkable life that spanned across 3 centuries can still serve as an example and inspiration of how one can use their privilege to help change the world. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to click subscribe for more videos like this one. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.